The coolest things sometimes are born out of necessity, like this 50 fathoms. It was not created to make some watch sales. It was created to explore the depth of the ocean. These watches are like race cars in that sense. They were built not to show, but to fulfill a real purpose. Blancpain CEO at the time, Mr. Jean-Jacques Fischer, he was a passionate diver himself. This 50 fathoms was created to answer a need from the French Combat Diving Corps to do their underwater missions. It was not an easy task designing an underwater dive watch at the time because there was no comp in the market back then. Of course, people like complications like minute repeaters and perpetual counters. I think these are cool to me because they also fulfill a purpose. But for the Blancpain, I think the real problem does not lie in the complexity of the movement, but in figuring out what's the right design. The water resistance is obviously a very big thing. But another vital thing would be if in the event of the crown being pulled out underwater, this watch still needs to keep the water out of the case. Secondly, it was very important for the divers to time their dive well, because when they get deeper and deeper into the ocean, they would need to know when is the right time to get up. Thirdly, the watch needs to be very legible. When you dive deeper, you really need to see the watch well in order to tell the time, or as we said earlier, to time your dive. And as there was nobody doing this, to figure everything out all at once was an incredible achievement. Oh, and we have to mention the name 50 Fathoms. It actually came from Shakespeare, from The Tempest, where Ariel sings, "Full fathom 5 thy father lies, of his bones are coral made." I find it hauntingly beautiful that this watch actually has that cool name, and I really urge every watch manufacturer to use more Shakespeare to name their models. And maybe that's why, because it's so romantic, the font for 50 Fathom is always cursive on the dial. Collecting the 50 Fathom is not an easy task either. There are definitely not as much material on this watch as a vintage Rolex Submariner does. Not only that, these things are not cheap and they are very niche. And you gotta have dedication. Today you can walk into a Blancpain store, you can buy one new for $10,000, you can buy one used for $5,000, but these things will run you multiples of what it would cost to buy a new one. So you gotta know your stuff. These sometimes will be 50,000, over 100,000 for a Grail example. Is it worth it, you ask me? I would say for any real enthusiast or for any military watch collector, the real thing like this is the only thing that matters. Not only are these watches produced from the 50s and 60s incredibly rare, they are also the purest expressions of what two watches should be. It is back then when these watches were created, they were created not to make money, not to just fulfill a marketing campaign. They were created to perform, to serve. And that's just much cooler than a modern watch that's a reissue of some really original design to me. This one is called a Mil-Spec 1, which was initially developed for different militaries across the world. You'll see some of them for sale at auction, sometimes with interesting provenances from different militaries. And there are also some which were sold to hobbyists, to diving professionals or recreational divers at the time. But to be honest, I don't enjoy the military versions so much. I know a lot of people do, they're cool, they're actually worn during all these missions. But to me, these watches, I want them to be less radioactive. The military ones usually have radium as their luminous materials. Civilian ones actually have tritium. The designs overall are similar, but I just find these are a little safer to wear. And you know, interestingly, it was more torturous for myself because these civilian version, you can actually call them nicknamed Demolition Watch. Demolition Watch is actually from the advertisement back in the day from Abercrombie and Fitch, when they were more of an outdoors company than today's fashion company. These are much rarer than the military versions. There are 12 known only in the market, so the hunting journey was really difficult. And the civilian versions are also a little different from their military versions. Their case construction is a little different. Also their case finishing, this one has a sandblasted case. It's a little different. It also has a newer movement installed and a new moisture indicator on the dial. So the indicator is there to tell you if the water gets into the case, you have to do something about it. This one is just truly spectacular. I'm really honored to have this here because would you look at the condition of this thing? This thing comes from the original family. She's a grandma. Her father worked with Mr.
Jacques Cousteau,
the famed French diver, and also he made a great TV show to show the underwater world, which is quite new at the time. But look at this watch. It doesn't look like it's being worn at all. It doesn't look battered. It's not used. And you can tell because there's still red seal on the case back. And that's super rare. You really see them. This is actually to indicate to the manufacturer that you have not tampered with the watch and you could still return it if you want to. But I do not advise you to return this, as it is probably cost you like $150 at the time to buy it. And today is a very different magnitude of pricing. Look at the watch. Everything is original. Look at the bezel, the case, the crown, the case back, and the dial is very surprising to me because when we got it, you can see some scratches and you don't know the condition of the dial. When we asked the watchmaker to take the crystal off, you can actually see the dial is flawless. It's a very flawless glossy surface and just being preserved so well. I left the crystal untouched because it has some surface scratches. It looks so cool. Like, it brings you a sense of history in this watch, and I just choose not to restore it. And I like to leave things untouched nowadays, and it's just nice to have something of historical importance and originality. And that's what these watches are all about to me. They are a great preserver of history. They take you back to a different time. And these are just much more difficult to find than any regular 50 Fathoms that's made today or being hyped or the limited editions. These are the real deals to me. These unrestored watches, these should be put into more important positions by collectors today. And people should pay more attention to this, because this is really magical to hold in your hand.